Welcome to the 7th episode of the Battle of Roberts Ridge during Operation Anaconda in March of 2002, and we're going to talk to the Strike Eagle Squadron Commander, Spanky Dennis. On the Lessons from the Cockpit show, we interview some of the most fascinating pilots, weapons system operators, maintainers, and aircrew members from all over the world. Our purpose is to hear their stories, but more importantly, what did they learn from being in these extreme and intense military, commercial, and even general aviation flying environments. Discussing their lessons learned allows us to increase our critical thinking skills both in the air and on the ground. And folks, on the Lessons from the Cockpit show, you are hearing some of these stories for the very first time. And on today's show, you're going to hear how a squadron commander had to manage basically two different wars, one at home and one deployed, and then thrown into Operation Anaconda and the Battle of Roberts Ridge. We're talking today with Colonel James Spanky Dennis, commander of the 335th Fighter Squadron, the famous Chiefs. The Lessons from the Cockpit show is financed by Wall Pilot, custom aviation art for the walls of your home, office, or hangar. We have ready to print 4, 6, and 8-foot images that you can peel off and stick to any wall. Airplanes from World War II all the way up to 5th generation fighters. And folks, these things are really, really detailed, and our customers love them when they see these things. They're great conversation pieces. So please go by wallpilot.com and take a look at the ready to print. But also, we do custom airplanes too, with your names, unit number, weapons load, and tail number. So, grab an adult beverage of your choice, sit down, strap in, and let's begin the Lessons from the Cockpit show with Colonel Spanky Dennis.
Welcome to the Lessons from the Cockpit show, Colonel Spanky Dennis.
It's great to be here, Mark Lego. How you doing?
I'm doing great, sir. And I can't thank you enough for coming on the Lessons from the Cockpit show, because you've got some amazing things in your background, flying an old airplane and a new airplane that we're going to talk about here in just a few minutes. But why don't you tell all of our listeners a little bit about yourself and your background?
Came in the Air Force around 81 and got out of NAV school. Went by the lead-in training, went to the F4 training at Homestead, and then my first assignment was Daegu, Korea, flying air-to-air every day, which is unusual for the F4. Obviously, back in those days, there was only two air-to-air squadrons, Daegu and Osan. Got a lot of great experience there, flying that much as a second lieutenant when I arrived, and leaving as a first lieutenant, left as an instructor, believe it or not. It was a real catalyst for my career at that point. Spent about 10 years in the F4. Went to weapons school, got done with weapons school, went to teach at the weapons school right afterwards, and then stayed there for about 5 years, or Moody in between there. A lieutenant instructor there, as well as a lieutenant wing Seafies. They did me well, that's for sure. It was tough being away from the wife on the first assignment. That was a catalyst for my flying career. Of course, being a weapons school grad always takes you out of those alpha tours, so didn't want to be an A-level, didn't want to do that stuff, So did a quick short staff tour at Langley and DR, Fighter Requirements. Worked for a great American, General Molnar at the time, George Molnar. Got picked up to go to the Strike Eagle. I wanted to go to Strike Eagle a lot earlier, obviously, as an initial contract, but I had too many gate months. They sent me off to the staff. I was only there for about 2.5 years. General Molnar got me back in the cockpit. Went to the Strike Eagle in 94 and then stayed into it. When I left Seymour as my last full-time flying, I actually flew with Lake and Heath when I was stationed in England at the KOC 9 for NATO, just outside of London, on the west side of London. Did fly with them a little bit, but, being an old colonel flying, not exactly, you always hear about those guys until they actually become one, and they're like, wow, may not be the life for me anymore. And I'd only been out of the cockpit for a year, because during Freedom, Iraqi Freedom, when I gave up command, I went to National War College for a year. And then from there, like I said, to Director of Operations for KOC 9, working for Air Marshal Sir Loader, who was the Strike Command commander for the RAF. But really, I ran the KOC, because he was, doing his Strike Command stuff. And I was the U.S. commander for all the U.S. folks there, as well as the commander for all the people at RAF Dawes Hill. And then I did my fighter group command as the Warrior Prep Center commander right after that, Germany, and really got interested in the whole modeling simulation, live virtual constructive type of world. They wanted me to stay in Europe to take another command. If it didn't start with L, like Lake and Heath, and I wasn't really that interested, so I needed to get back to the States anyways. My son was starting college, and my wife's parents were getting older. So I asked to come to the Air Force Agency for Modeling Simulation as the commander commander, and I did stay there until I decided to retire, and then went to work for the industry.
Talk to our audience a little bit about what you do in modeling and simulation, because that's a really fascinating kind of thing to get involved with.
I'm currently working for ASRC Federal, which is Alaska Native Corporation. Just a great company. They represent the Inupiats up in the Arctic Slope region, allowing them to maintain their quality of life and their way of life. The Alaska Native corporations were established in the 70s. It's an 8A, although we do a lot of business. I mean, I'm on the federal side, ASRC Federal and Defense and Intel side, and I'm the BD lead for the Air Force account. So I run all Air Force BD essentially and capture opportunities. The modeling and simulation world and training, that is the future of the Air Force, right? Especially as we get into FITCHN. You can't train in the same environment that we trained in when we were younger. Yeah. Our big exercise was Red Flag, but not even Red Flag replicates the real environment that FITCHN is going to have to fly in and go to combat in. So the whole live virtual constructive, it'll never replace live training altogether, but what it does is really, it just builds the environment. You can play in that environment, whether it be through a constructive simulation or a simulator or a live aircraft or live systems. As long as they all integrate together, then you can build that environment. And I know that's where the Air Force is going. The Army's already going there with their synthetic training environment. The Air Force is going there with their live mission operation capability, as well as some of the other capabilities that they bring into the DMOC, which is the Virtual Training Center for the Air Force, and the Virtual Test and Training Center out of Nellis Air Force Base. From a company perspective, training is one of those words that, just a broad meaning, right? From an industry perspective, what we see involved in training, I kind of break it up into 4 areas. One is the products areas, the simulators, those type of things. The other is services where you do exercise, design, control, execution. And then the other 2 areas, which I think are the most important, are the architectures, the networks, cybersecurity, and then the software side, which is the software integration, systems of systems integration. That's what really makes it all work, right? The architecture, the network, the systems of systems integration. So from from ASRC Federal's perspective, we provide all that except products. We don't really provide products, but we have a robust capability from IT, networks, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, multi-level security, all those things that are required for those networks, those integration pieces, especially on the software integration side. So that's where we really concentrate, and the DoD in general is going to get there. And then you're going to see the other federal agencies, start to follow suit. But they're making great strides in it already. There are already serious programs out there that do all of this. But really it is the reason I went in this industry, going from combat to training to modeling simulation, those type of things. It really is still about the warfighter. They need this environment to train in. And the industry, whether it be my company or any other company, is what's going to be required to bring that capability to them. And it involves all the high-tech companies nowadays, from cloud to, to the large networks. Just thinking about on the range, the amount of information that has to move around, whether it be 5G, whether it be, how you move that data, how you process that data in real time. It's from the top level companies all the way down. So that's our focus. Although we do some great things when it comes to, we have a whole space division that's run by a former astronaut, called Scooter. He's a former F-14 pilot and a shuttle pilot. We do great work in the space side. We do infrastructure on Air Force and Army DoD side. We do infrastructure operations support. We have the front gate to the back gate at Vance Air Force Base. We got 450 people at Kirkland that does all the base support. And then we got professional services. And we have our software folks. And then, of course, we have our IT network. Cybersecurity is one of our big areas. So we're considered an 8A small business, but we do almost $2 billion a year. And, we closed well over $1 billion last year on the defense and intel side. So we're low risk for the customer, that's for sure. But it's all about, it really is all about the Alaska Natives, Northern region. I know that's probably a little bit longer, than we want to talk about that, but it is important to really understand that it is industry that's going to be required to the DoD.
Well, I think the thing that's cool about this, Spanky, is like in pilot training now, they do a lot of it virtually and they do a lot of it network. I'll be honest with you, when I first saw that, you and I being from a different era, I kind of went, I don't know about that. But the guys that have gone through pilot training are saying, hey, it's actually pretty good. It actually works pretty good. And I can remember a time period where we were talking, I was at Air Force Operational Test and Evaluation Center, where they were talking about networking the F-16s at Hill with the F-15s at Langley, with the F-117s out of Holloman, and actually virtually doing a strike package and going in and doing stuff. That's the kind of world that you're talking about in this virtual reality, you can make mistakes and not get killed, and sit down and actually talk about, hey, here's the mistakes we made. Here's the ramification of those. How do we fix them? Obviously, the debriefs are very important. I understand what you're saying is this is the way to go.
Simulators were never networked when I was flying, right? So, it's one of those, hey, my wife calls, tell her I'm in the sim,
Yeah.
The only time we actually ever cared about being, other than EPs and check rides. Nowadays, they're all networked through the Distributed Mission Operation Network. Of course, the DMOC, Distributed Mission Operations Center in Kirkland, does a fantastic job of virtual flag and coalition flag of networking all these aircraft together for large force employment. And so that's one of those environments that you can actually bring all of the other capabilities into that environment, whether it be AWACS, tankers, no matter what it is. I mean, Joint Stars are all there. And then the Virtual Testing Training Center at Nellis, they are very focused on FitGen. And that's where they do all TTP development, those type of things in the FitGen environment through that center, essentially, there at Nellis, that networks the FitGen together and provides them environment. Like you mentioned, too, about the new pilot training, this is the generation, right? They're not going to get anything from PowerPoint slides. They're not going to get anything from simulation that doesn't look realistic, right? They're used to playing Halo and everything else, Call of Duty. They want something that's realistic, but this is their world. They are just as happy in a simulated environment as they are in a real environment, and they thrive on it. You have to look at the next generation that you're trying to train in this environment. And this world is all about, gaming, essentially.
And see, here's the cool thing about this gaming too, is you can simulate any kind of threat from a Russian S-400 down to some ship or anything, and put it in this benign environment and give these young kids experience. I call them young kids because they're a lot younger than you and I, obviously. But you can put them in this benign, threat-filled environment and actually give them some really good experience doing it.
So you take close air support as an example, right? So anytime I've ever trained for close air support, whether it be in the F4 or the F-15E, if I wasn't at an exercise, it really was, your wingman saying, giving you a 9-line, right? I used to get so mad at my guys sometimes because I look over the cockpit and they're looking where I'm looking, right?
Yeah.
I'm looking on the ground, giving them a 9-line. They're looking where I'm looking, rather than actually take the 9-line like you should from a JTAP or whatever, and then, prosecuting that target. So it was the same way with the search to air threat. You got a SA-6 right 3 o'clock. You got indications. You got a launch. Here comes a missile. Really, all you're doing is just a maneuver, but you're not really actually reacting to a real threat, whether it be a radar threat or whether it be an actual SAM launch. In this environment with constructive simulations, virtual simulations, you can do every bit of that. And then in this live virtual constructive environment, as you know, when we talk about JTACs, a lot of times they're sitting in a talk. So they're looking at a predator feed and they're giving you a 9-line. They're not even anywhere near you. They're, could be in another country giving you a 9-line. When I was at the Warrior Prep Center, we started that live virtual constructive for the JTAC. We had the JTAC school as part of my group at the Warrior Prep Center. And they were NATO guys. They were, US guys. But, for some of them, for NATO guys, it was just knowing the language, right? Being able to speak English. But we were able to, actually hook up our Predator sim to their rover, feed that to them, and then we had a guy in a simulator that would fly an F-16, F-15 sim, whether it be at the WPC or somewhere else, or even a live aircraft over the range, and those guys would give them a 9-line talk on based on what they're seeing on the rover picture, right, from the Predator, which was all simulated. There's no difference. A Predator or Reaper that's flying live is going to be given the same picture, no matter what, if it's simulated or real. Because you got entities moving on the ground in a constructed simulation. That's what they see. They're going to give a 9-line based on that. And then the guys that are airborne are going to prosecute the target. So it doesn't really matter where that information is coming from as long as it looks realistic.
And you know what, Spanky, you just mentioned something really important there too, is you're putting these people in these environments. And there's a difference between training and education, isn't there? And that's the one thing I think that separates our military from everybody else is the way we train, particularly as a weapons school grad. I helped stand up the KC-135 weapons school. Worst 4 years of my career, but at the same time, probably one of the most rewarding. And now it's been going 21 years. We've got 216 grads. But I remember guys and gals coming out of that saying, combat was easier than the weapons school. Combat was easier than our training. Yeah. And what a great life lesson that is, I think, when you train the way we train, you go, oh, I've seen this before. And it's up to guys like you, the weapons school grads, that go back to the squadrons and give them that training. And now we've got these virtual tools to be able to train it even a better environment and sit down and talk about those mistakes without getting anybody killed.
Yeah, well, you know, when I was a weapons school instructor, I used to always tell my students, I go, you know, being a weapons school grad only gives you one thing, and that's a license to teach. It doesn't mean you go to the squadron and you thump your chest and you act like you're the best and, you know, nobody can come close to you because we always learn, right? But as we saw, and my biggest lesson of all of this is, if you trust your weapons officers and you give them the opportunity to lead, to train, then you will be ready for any event. I don't care if it's 9/11. I don't care if it's Enduring Freedom, Iraqi Freedom. I don't care if it's a new mission you've never done or a system that you've never looked at. If your people are trained correctly, then you won't have any issues. It's not an old boys club. It is being in a fighter squadron, is not being about in an old boys club. It is about training for combat. Mm-hmm. It is about training to actually go out and, as much as I hate to say it, break things, you know, do it correctly and win a war. I mean, that's what it's about. You know, when I first came in the Air Force, the big threat was the Soviet Union, right? And we thought, wow, you know, this probably never happened because it's going to be a nuclear war. Of course, we were always nuclear qualified and everything else. But when I came to the Air Force, it kind of was the old boys club. You know what I mean? We all went and flew. We had our squadron. There really wasn't a threat out there other than the Soviet Union. We had a lot of older Vietnam vets, you know, and, you know, that was their world. But we just didn't see it coming. You know, I never saw it coming when I joined the Air Force. I never saw Libya. I never saw Desert Storm, coming. I never saw Bosnia, Kosovo coming, or Enduring Freedom, or Iraqi Freedom. I mean, who would have thought that all those conflicts would have taken place in career? I thought I'd fly 20 years and never see combat, and that'd be it.
And you end up seeing a lot of combat, don't you?
Yeah, a lot of time away from home, that's for sure.
Isn't that the truth? A lot of time away from home. You flew with the Hooters out of Taegu, and you guys had strictly air-to-air mission?
Yeah,
that's all you guys did?
Never dropped a bomb, I don't think. Did strafe, I think, a couple of times, scared ourselves enough to stop. Most every mission I ever flew was air-to-air. We were the only two air-to-air squadrons, us and Osan. Osan did have I think they had a paid spike mission, but ours was strictly air-to-air at Taegu. I think after I left, they tried to go to some air-to-ground. Kind of lost track of that, but I think they did a little bit air-to-ground after that. But most of it was air-to-air. For me, it was all air-to-air.
You don't even drop bombs off an F4 until you get to Moody again, don't you?
Yeah, I dropped bombs off of F4s at Homestead, took a 1-year break, and then went to Moody and dropped bombs again. So
yeah. So did you guys have paid spike and all that stuff at Moody when you were there? Yeah,
we had paid spike, GB10s, 12s. We had gun pods, believe it or not. We actually carried gun pods. And we were a rapid deployment force at the time. So that was really our mission. We had a nuke mission as well.
You were flying F4Es at Moody and you had a gun pod?
Yeah, we used to carry centerline gun pod. So we had the nose and we had the centerline.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's kind of an unusual load for a F4.
It is. I mean, typically the F4D carried the gun pod, but we did it Moody as well. You can actually carry 3 of them, if you want to put one on each wing, but a whole lot of drag and a whole lot of bullets going out there. But we typically just put the gun pod on the center line. It was a 30 millimeter gun pod.
Oh, so it was a big gun. It was a big bullet.
Yeah, wow. It wasn't the typical 20 millimeter that was on the F4D. It was a 30 millimeter.
What was that like when that thing started rattling, shooting bullets underneath your airplane?
It would shake your teeth. It would definitely
get your attention.
The barrel was right underneath the seat, and so you could definitely feel that one.
Oh, so the barrel's underneath your seat?
Yeah. So the gun pod's on the center line. The barrel's pretty much right under it, right underneath the back seat. So you could definitely feel that thing when it went off.
Tell our listeners what it was like going from the F4 to the F-15E. And you were flying fairly brand new ones right off the assembly line.
The Strike Eagle?
Yeah, the Strike Eagle.
Yeah, it had been off about 3 years. So the Strike Eagle, pretty much what they did is they took the F4 and they fixed it. You know what I mean? Everything we always wanted in the F4, more weapons load, longer legs, more time on station, a 9G capable jet, a great radar, all the weapons that you could think of in the inventory that you could carry. That's what they did. And more importantly, I mean, even was the navigation system, right? I mean, the F4, you had to line the INS, and just to make sure you had a platform, you never looked at it again, because you always had to carry a map in your hand, which was great for learning, great for going into the Strike Eagle too, because, your habit patterns there, if you came out of the F4 and probably even the 111, is to look out the window and make sure that you're, where you need to be, versus always relying on a inertial nav, a GPS, and a mission navigator. And having, by the way, a great targeting pod too, with the Lantern pod that we started out with. And radar. So everything that we ever wanted in the F4, they put in the Strike Eagle. Just a great platform. From a backseat perspective, going from the F4 to the Strike Eagle was pretty straightforward. Radar control handles, everything that was laid out essentially the same way, except you had two control handles for the Strike Eagle, where you had one radar control handle for the F4. But still have stick and rudder and throttles and everything else. So it was pretty straightforward transition from the Strike Eagle, or from the F4 to the Strike Eagle. One thing that was a little bit different was the air-to-air environment. The F-15C guys had their own procedures, their own TTPs that they brought with them to the Strike Eagle, other than the backseater running the radar, right? But, we had to get used to a lot of different targeting, sorting, comm type stuff, and as way formations and all was definitely different in the F4. And by the way, the F4 had a name 7 and it had a name 9, right? So by the time AMRAAM came around in the F4, you're pretty much like a MiG-21. You stay away from the AMRAAMs, and also, our tactics kind of drove us in a different direction in the F4, opposed to when we went Strike Eagle. Then it became more of an offensive type of platform, as opposed to the later days of the F4 being more of a defensive type of mentality, where you had to stay away from the AMRAAMs.
So the first time you get to fly the Strike Eagle in combat is during deliberate force over in Kosovo area?
So I went Strike Eagle, Luke, I was at Luke for FTU, and I went straight to Lakenheath and went into the 494th as an ADO there. And, they had just started doing Operation Deny Flight, as well as Northern Watch out of Turkey. 494th was doing Northern Watch out of Turkey, and things were getting a little bit more heated up in Turkey at that time than they were in Bosnia. And so we did a swap where 494th went to Aviano to take over Operation Deny Flight, and the bowlers went down to Northern Watch. Well, for some reason, I was picked to always take the squadron to Aviano for every deployment, just about, as the deployed commander. It just so happened, I think, on about my second or third deployment, things were starting to heat up in Bosnia because of the safe havens and the safe areas. The Bosnian Serbs were starting to do a lot of bad things to people there, mass graves and mass executions and everything else. I got the call to go plan 2 operations. One was called Operation Deliberate Force, and one was called Operation Deadeye Northwest. And the Northwest was up in the area where O'Grady got shot down. Deliberate Force was just more of a southern type of, around Srebrenica, around Sarajevo type of area, where a lot of the command and control was. Their bomb dumps, where they were doing a lot of shelling into Sarajevo, those areas. We planned that. I planned that with a couple of guys out of Aviano with the Navy as well. And then went to the carrier to plan one of them. And then we just kind of stood by, so, and then they turned the keys over to NATO, when the United Nations couldn't make a decision, they turned the keys over to NATO, and they said, okay, we're going to go do it. I got a call and happened to be at the beach with the guys in the squadron because we had a day off. And I can't remember who the wing commander was. He goes, Spanky, where you at? And I said, I'm at the beach. He said, that's not good. You need to get back. So jumped in the car, didn't even get to have our first drink, and then drove all the way back to Aviano and executed that next night. It was a night mission. We got airborne with 12 Strike Eagles. And those operations never stopped. I mean, it was about a 3-week, event, combat event, and we just kept calling and saying, hey, I need some aircrew waivers. And they said, stop calling me. You got all the waivers you need. So, and then finally got some relief in. But, the fact of the matter is the base couldn't hold any more jets. We had every type of aircraft there, including the Spanish with their F-18s. We had Aviano, we had us, Marine Corps there, the Navy was flying off the carriers. So we just didn't have really any room for any more aircraft there at Aviano. But we were doing GBU 10s, 12s.
And the AGM 130.
Yeah, we're doing AGM GBU-130s as well as GBU-15s, AGM-130s and the 15s. So, we didn't do a lot of those. I didn't really have anybody qualified, but we did get a couple of guys qualified that just showed up, including Grace Kelly. They went out and flew those missions. So very successful operation. I was leading the one package that the Mirage got shot down. That was the only aircraft that we lost. I think it was Mirage 2000 got shot down. I went back out looking for him the next night, but they had already been captured at that point. They were released and all at the end of it. But yeah, most of our targets were command and control, ammo dumps, artillery type of emplacements. That pretty much ended the whole issue that was going on in Bosnia at the time. And then, of course, Kosovo picked up. And then we did another swap, and then I started taking the squadron down to Northern Watch out of Turkey, out of Incirlik, flying into northern Iraq. Did that for about 3.5, almost 4 years out of Lakenheath, and then went to Seymour.
Man, I loved flying out of Incirlik. The Northern Watch missions, I got the opportunity to do it twice. Flying tankers, going out there to the Raz, orbiting, sitting there looking at Mount Ararat to the north, and beautiful, beautiful country. But oh my gosh, those missions were, for a tanker guy, those were just really, really fun missions to be out there refueling you guys, the Strike Eagles, and seeing all the different weapons loads you guys are carrying too. And there was one time I was there, I think it was the Rockets were there this time. They were carrying GBU-10s and GBU-12s on two of the jets, and they cleaned one of them off because they had that many targets. Too many. The Saddam was shooting at too many guys.
Yeah, well, the beauty of the Strike Eagle is it carries such a variety of weapons that, and we can talk about this as we get into Afghanistan and all. It carries such a variety of weapons that, like, pick your weapon that's required, right? The exact weapon for the target area, based on either size or guidance or whatever it may be, or the weather. So it carries just so many different types of weapons. It allows you to do things that you couldn't do, like in the F4. It allows you to do things you couldn't do, say 117, obviously, that's not the type of mission we're talking about, but it does carry a wide variety of weapons, even the data link weapons. And one thing interesting during Bosnia, we were doing close air support too, had a lot of NATO JTACs on the ground, and we were actually carrying the data link pod for the F-15E for the data link weapons. They were actually sending us data link 9 lines out of the KAOK, out of Vicenza.
Really?
So, stay feet wet if we could, but if we were over land, and we would just point our aircraft in the direction of Vicenza, and they would data link us 9 lines, put slides out there, and we could, on our display, we could see the slides that they were putting up and the 9 lines, target pictures, and everything else. So we were actually doing close air support, getting 9 lines off of data link pods. A lot of ingenuity, going in there, but when you don't have JTACs on the ground that can give you a 9 line, then that's the only way you can get it right.
I'd never heard that.
Yeah, so
I never heard that capability.
Yeah, well, that's the only time we ever used it, was over Bosnia. Yeah, it worked extremely well, believe it or not. We could actually record it in the cockpit and play it back in the cockpit.
Oh, jeez.
So we could record the 9 lines they give us in case we miss something and just play it back. Especially when they throw up the target photos, you can actually play back to the target photos, freeze it, and then when you're going in looking for the targets, you got your target photo, you got your maps right there on the other displays that you can see it.
Boy, what an incredible capability that is, to be able to see all that stuff in your cockpit. Holy smokes. I didn't know that. That's
the story of the Strike Eagle. The Strike Eagle, man, every time it seems like there's a conflict, they just throw things at you, whether it be the data link, capability, or the fighter data link as well, Link 16, and of course the new, they put the sniper pod on for us for Iraqi Freedom. When they need something on the Strike Eagle, they put it on there and we take it into combat. Well, including the thermobaric, right? The thermobaric bomb during Anaconda.
We're going to get to that here in a few minutes, because that's an amazing story too in and of itself. But you mentioned something that during this time period, you're doing close air support. And I know there's this big battle about the Strike Eagles doing close air support during that time period. It's not in your doctrine. It's not anywhere in any of your pubs. But you guys are going out and doing it because you have to.
What we did in Bosnia as far as close air support was it just came back in a weird way during Afghanistan, but yeah, so 3-1 has a page that says, Strike Eagle doesn't do close air support. When it fell under close air support, there's one page, and that's all it's in the middle of it. But when you're the only assets out there and you're carrying weapons for close air support that are good for close air support, then, you're expected to employ them. So we did train close air support missions when I was at Lake and Heath before we went to Bosnia, Aviana for Bosnia. So we did do some close air support training. We did some in sim as well. We had classes on it. So the guys are ready to execute close air support because they've been trained to do it. And by the way, when we get out and over land or whatever, or over water, if we didn't have anything going on that day before delivered force kicked off, then we would do close air support 9-line talk-ons and just practice while we're out there with nothing going on. Because that was in the days of the no-fly, right? So
yeah,
we stayed over the water most of the times, and then somebody took off. They would threaten them. Whether they landed or not didn't matter. We stayed feet wet most of the time, and then we started going feet dry later on. And then of course Bosnia, we went feet dry all the time, obviously, and then after that we were always feet dry as well. We had trained for it. I'm not going to say it was our main focus, but we just knew that something was going to come about. And by the way, we had a lot of F4 guys in the squadron. So F4s always did close air support. Had quite a few guys that had close air support experience. And we had A-10 guys as well. Quite a few in my class at Luke came out of the A-10. They showed up they went to Lake and Heath with me. And they were in Aviana with me. I had a lot of A-10 guys that were very well versed in close air support. Doing close air support in Strike Eagle, obviously different than the A-10, right? A lot faster. The backseaters doing all the close air support type of coordination and work, doing the talk-ons, using the lantern pod, using his eyeballs, night vision goggles, whatever it may be. And then, confirming between the two of you that you have the target, of course. So it is a little bit different from a front seat perspective than it was in the A-10.
Yeah, but what an incredible asset to have these A-10 bubbas show up in your squadron and be able to teach you all this stuff, particularly, shooting at the ground and shooting the gun at the ground, all those kinds of things. A question for you. You had, if I remember right, you had just become the squadron commander of the Chiefs in August of 2001, correct?
Yeah, I was in the July timeframe around there.
Mm-hmm.
I was the ops officer the year prior for the Chiefs. It was an easy move for me. I only spent 1 year as the ops officer, took over the squadron in the July timeframe. So I just moved from one office to the other. My focus when I became the commander was our flying hour program. I mean, it was so difficult. We had to fly over 6,000 hours a year for our flying hour program, and it was incredibly tough to make those flying hours. We had to, and those were in the days where I owned maintenance as well. So, I understood maintenance's issues, and we had to get very creative. Ops officer was Randy Roberts, great guy. We would do things like send the force ship out every weekend cross country and just ask them to fly 2 sorties a day. That's 8 sorties a day. And you do that for 3 days, you're talking 24 sorties. So rather than put everything on my guys, my maintenance guys to try to get those sorties and those hours, I needed them to fix the jets because they were always, we always had issues with aircraft availability. So if I could get transient alert somewhere else or an F-15 base to turn those jets for me and get 24 sorties on the weekend, I'd do it. And we did it. Seemed like almost every weekend we would do those cross country. So really my main focus was the 6,000 plus hours I had to fly every year and get it done. That lasted for about a month. I did it as an ops officer, then it lasted for about a month after I took command because September 11th hit.
But what a great opportunity for particularly your young guys and gals in the cockpit to say, hey, why don't you go out the hill and drop a few bombs out there and fly around out there and fight with the F-16s? Because what a great training opportunity that would be for new folks that are coming into the squadron to just be able to do that.
So one thing I did often was I sent them down to Savannah at the Guard Training Center down there. They have an ACMI capability down there. So I would send, a 12 ship down there often as I could. I think we did maybe 3 times when I was the ops officer and 1 time when I was a squadron commander, send them down there and they would deploy out of, fly out of there and get as many sorties as they could, flying air to air or air to air or air to ground to the different ranges in Georgia as well as Florida down at Pine Castle and Avon Park. So it's about taking the load off of your maintenance guys,
Yeah.
and getting as many sorties as you can and taking the load off your maintenance guys because they were working incredible hours to try to get those flying hours. And, everybody's graded on that, right? Yeah. So nobody's going to give you a break on it.
You and I both know that, we got to fly airplanes, but the guys and gals that really made it happen were the guys and gals that worked on them. And like you said, we're out there day and night, bad weather, good weather, turning wrenches, fixing things, And I can't say enough good things about crew chiefs because I'm flying a 60-year-old airplane and we got a lot of things that would break on them. I'll never forget the first night of Desert Storm. The crew chief that I had was a gal. Her name was Bonnie Peterson. And she was fantastic. I only asked her one question. Is this jet ready to go? And she goes, yep. And I believed her. And she was that good. 9/11 rolls around. Where are you at 9/11 and what happens in your squadron? Talk to our audience about, you're the commander. You haven't had the squadron for very long. And now there's national event happens.
To give you the story. So I don't know if you remember, September the 11th, at least on the East Coast, was just the most beautiful day I'd seen in a long, long time.
Gorgeous.
The temperature perfect. There wasn't a cloud in the sky. Believe it or not, I was briefing for a sortie, and I had the wing commander in my flight, and we were going to go drop live bombs. So our jets were sitting in the live load area. We were going to go drop live bombs, and so I go into the briefing, and I'm doing the briefing. I'm the lead. I get a knock on the door. I'm like, okay. So I open the door, and it's my duty desk folks, and they said, "Hey, sir, your wife's on the phone." And I'm like, okay. So I'm thinking one of two things. Either somebody behind the duty desk is going to be in serious trouble for interrupting my briefing with the wing commander, or something really bad has happened in my family, right? And that was my biggest fear. Something with my parents, her parents, my son, whatever it may be. So I get to the duty desk and I answer the phone, and it's my wife, and she said, "Hey, did you see what happened on TV?" I'm like, okay, somebody at the duty desk is going to die. That's my first thought.
Yeah.
And I said, no, I said, I'm in a briefing. And she said, you need to turn on the TV. So I turned on the TV. I hadn't turned on the TV, and I see this airplane. Couldn't tell at first, but I knew it wasn't a Cessna. Saw this airplane flying into the towers, right? And so I said, okay, leave the TV on. So I went back into the briefing room, and the wing commander said, everything all right? I said, yeah. I said, it's on TV. I said, it looked like an airliner just flew into the World Trade Center. He's like, wow, that's strange. I said, yeah. We continued to brief, and then I get another knock on the door. And they said, hey, you need to come see this. And so the wing commander came out with me, and it was the second aircraft that flew into the towers. I talked to him, he talked to me, and I said, hey, I think we need to cancel sorties today, at least in my squadron. And so we canceled all of my sorties, and then he went to the command post. All the squadron commanders stayed in their squadron. The ops group commander, the wing commander went to the command post. They called us there, but before we got there was another threat, so they locked down the command post. So I never will forget it. We're sitting on the number, I think it's 17 T-box at Seymour. All the squadron commanders, we have our radios, right? And then I get a call, says, hey, Spanky, you guys need to generate 12 jets, fully loaded, AMRAAMs, AIM-9s, and gun. And by the way, you have 4 hours to do it. So, so we go out there, and by the way, half my jets are loaded with live bombs. So those have to come off. CFTs have to be reconfigured, have to put all the missiles up, and then have to load all the HEI in the gun instead of here's the whole background. They locked down the base. I couldn't go home for like 3 or 4 days. Nobody could come on the base. I have most of my guys in the squadron. We're all on the flying schedule. So they're all there. And then I have guys that are, TDY, some to school like Split, and some, were just on vacation. And I started getting phone calls. Of course, you couldn't catch a flight. You couldn't get a rental car. Some guys are saying, I'm going to rent a motorcycle. And I said, you have to, don't do that. I said, nothing's going to happen, for us to deploy in the next 2, 3, 4 weeks, whatever. No reason for you to come home. Just be safe, get home when you can. So we were generating the jets, and we started out with just my load crews. And by, as we got started, then I had all 4 squadrons load crews helping us load the jets. Going back to the maintenance guys, I have never seen guys in weapons load crews work that hard in my entire life to take off all the bombs, reconfigure the CFTs. There's other decisions that were made that were not, I would have probably made a different decision, but it's not my call to make,
Yep.
There's 72 jets at, whatever it is, 96 jets at Seymour, We didn't have to, load up the missiles on specific jets. But anyways, the bottom line is the maintenance guys got it done. And I remember we had all the jets out at EOR, and we're loading the last jets, the 20 millimeter, we're loading them by hand because all the loaders had broke. All the gun motors had broke.
Oh, jeez.
So we're loading that last jet by hand, and we probably finished with 2 minutes to spare on the 4-hour, timeline that we had. And, we had no food. We had no, nothing. So I just told my snackos, hey, order as many pizzas as you can. With the snacko money, what you don't have, just bill me and, I'll pay for them. We took all the pizzas, we took them out to the flight line and feed all the maintenance guys that were out there. They had no food. I mean, the chow hall and the in-flight kitchen weren't delivering anything to us at that point. They had other important, not them, but support group commander had really important things going on. But anyway, so then we got cots down at the EOR, and we stayed at the EOR for almost 4 days. That's where we lived. Nobody took a shower. We got sleep when we could. We launched the first jet right after we got the 12 up and ready to go. We launched the first two ship for that mission. They went straight to DC. And then I think I flew with the second one that took off right afterwards, went up to DC as well to replace the two ship that was up there. Mm-hmm. But as you know, we had no tanker support at the time. When I got there, we finally did get tanker support. Yep. We could hit the tanker. So the only 3 airplanes that were airborne at the time in the whole country was my two ship and the tanker, essentially. Yeah. But again, one of the most beautiful days you ever seen to fly. But got over DC and over the Pentagon, and it was still, on fire, smoking. It was a mess.
That must have been surreal, Spanky, seeing that.
It makes you angry. I mean, angry is a word that I would use, because we eventually went up to New York too, and just angry is the word to see that destruction. Yeah. One thing that really hit me, though, is I'm looking down the Pentagon and go, wow, that must really be a big building for an airliner to hit it on that west side. And it's just the west side, and not all the way into the whole building. 'Cause I guess it kind of skipped going in there, but that just shows you how big and strong that building is, that it took that hit. Of course, a lot of people lost their lives, a lot of heroes that day too, getting people out. Mm-hmm. So getting airborne, a couple of things. One is the ROE. There wasn't any, right? We just got airborne. First person I contacted was Washington Center, and I asked him, I said, hey, who's my authority to do anything? And he said, well, I guess I am. And I said, no, I don't think you are. You need to find somebody that can, tell me what I need to do. So we had come up with, all kinds of things that we could possibly think about, And the other thing is my brother flies for Delta. He did at the time. He flew for Delta. The last thing I want to do is, shoot a Delta aircraft out of the sky and figure out my brother, And then the other thing is, I don't want to shoot. You don't want to shoot down a passenger aircraft that has that many innocent lives on it either. So it was just a very tough situation. We came up with everything possible. We had the combat laser on the jet, and so put it in the cockpit, burn our eyes out. See if you can do it that way. Straight to the cockpit, whatever it may be. Give somebody a chance, right, to try to. My personal last resort was to shoot a missile and take down the whole aircraft. I would try everything I could before that with combat lasers and strafing and everything else that I could possibly do. Luckily, it never came to that. I mean, thank God. A lot of Cessnas decided to get airborne around the East Coast, and we would go down and intercept them, and they had no idea what was going on. They just took off, from some field somewhere, maybe in the backyard for all I know, and you'd go past them doing about 600 knots, and they would know it's time to land. But so we started that, and man, we did not end. It went 24/7. And then the other squadron started to pitch in for the crews. As a matter of fact, the first crew that flew was actually a rocket crew. Flew the first mission for Noble Eagle, because my guys were just about out of crew rest, to be honest with you. So they were out on the flight line as well, helping the maintenance guys. That seeing that all the air crew and all the maintenance guys coming together. How air crew are, right? They want to try that loader. You never would let them do it. They want to load missiles, never will let them do it. Yeah. But they were just there to support. Go get what you needed. Help move equipment or whatever it may be, but you had to leave that up to the weapons loaders and all the maintenance guys to get those jets ready.
And isn't that amazing, Spanky, that how almost like with the flip of a switch, everybody comes together, everybody knows what they need to do, and they're doing it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Everybody comes together and everybody's doing it. Everybody's working. It's like I worked like a 36-hour day that day, trying to figure out how we're going to get gas across the West Coast.
Yeah.
Then you do what you have to do. If you get a bite to eat, that's good too, And isn't it funny how we go to war and pizza is the first thing that comes to our mind when we're hungry?
Yeah. Well, anything that could be delivered to the gate and was edible was good for them,
Yeah.
Obviously, something you've never trained for, something you've never trained for as a commander, something you never thought would ever happen to you as a commander, but not one single word of complaint. The only words that were ever spoken was, when are we going to be able to deploy and go get revenge, was essentially the talk. Those guys would have stayed out there for 5 weeks straight if you asked them to. So, obviously there was never a single complaint of anything other than not being able to get airborne right away and, within, like 30 minutes or something, but never a complaint other than, they really
I had
did.
the same emotion you did. Who am I going to go kill?
Yeah.
Who am I going to go kill? And we'd all heard bin Laden's name, but we all kind of went, oh, yeah, okay, whatever. He's some guy in long robes over in the Middle East somewhere. And all of a sudden, he becomes enemy number one.
Yeah. I mean, all I could think of was give me a 2-ship and a tanker, fully loaded with bombs, and I'll be back. I'll be gone for a while, but I'll be back. I mean, that was the only thing I could think about at the time.
I would be happy to be that tanker, brother, because that's the way we all felt. Who's going to, and it's amazing that this is September 11th, and by October 7th, we're dropping bombs.
Yeah. So we did Noble Eagle up until around December. Well, we did Noble Eagle for almost a full year. As we were doing Noble Eagle, we were getting words. So the words were one squadron was going to go set up a bear base operation at a northern country that was friendly to us there for Afghanistan. I don't even think it had been named Enduring Freedom at that point. I think it was just 12 horsemen or whoever were already in there, doing what they were doing. Mountain Home was already at Al Jaber in Kuwait. The word for us was one of the squadrons was going to go set up a bear base operation in Tajikistan, and the other one is going to be the backup for Mountain Home in Kuwait. Well, this is, getting into the winter, so, setting up a bear base operation probably was not going to happen, is not going to be easy, because the ground was frozen. I just kind of bided my time, and then I got a call one day that says, hey, Spanky, your squadron's leaving in I think it was 4 days, you're going to go replace Mountain Home. So we said, okay. So we got our 12 jets, ready, and got the squadron ready to deploy, and deployed our 12 jets to Al Jaber. So we were doing Southern Watch and Enduring Freedom during that time frame, and we were flying Noble Eagle still at home with my other 12 jets. So we had 24/7 ops at home, flying Noble Eagle. We had 24/7 ops in 2 combat theaters, one in Southern Watch in Iraq and one in Afghanistan. And we were doing them all simultaneously, separated by 7,400 miles.
And talk about the challenge that is for you as a squadron commander with all of these things going on.
I had 2 great people, Lieutenant Colonel Lovelady, who ran my squadron back home. He didn't deploy with us. And my ops officer, Randy Roberts, who was with me in Kuwait, because when you're flying a 11, 12, 13-hour mission to Afghanistan, you're out of pocket as a squadron commander for 2 days, essentially, maybe even 3, right? Yeah. You have to put the trust in your people that you put in a position to lead, including your flight commander. Did I worry? Oh, yeah. I worried every time a jet took off to go, fly 5 hours away for a combat mission and have to fly back home, after spending 3 or 4 hours in country. You never know what's going to happen. I got the airplanes at home, I got the airplanes in Southern Watch, and I got the airplanes in Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan. You're always worried, but you come to the conclusion real soon that you have to trust the people that you put in a position to lead, because you cannot be there all the time. There's absolutely no way. You never get any sleep during 24-hour operations, But for the aircrew too, I mean, we're talking about them who are deployed to Jaber having 2 sets of spins, 2 sets of ROEs, 2 sets of, the 2 different theaters that they're employing at. We were still dropping bombs in Southern Watch, we were, on S-60s and everything else. So you would go fly either a training mission or you go fly a Southern Watch mission, and you would drop bombs, and you come back, and then the next day you would fly an Enduring Freedom mission. Of course, those were so long when you landed, you had to, go into crew rest for that amount of time. The next day you go fly a training mission or you fly a Southern Watch mission. The day after that, you go back to Afghanistan. I mean, it was just nonstop operations. Nobody would have ever thought you'd fly 11 to 13-hour mission, for combat. All ROE was different. All the spins were different. All the procedures were different for the 2 theaters. So, the guys had to really stay focused on where they were going, what they were doing in order to, not, do anything strange or stupid, But again, you train them right, they're gonna do the mission, and they're gonna do the mission right. Never had a single issue in either Southern Watch or Northern Watch. Matter of fact, we were given so many strange missions in Southern Watch. They were deception missions and everything else, and we executed every one of those perfect. And every one of our bombs were 100% on target. Doing what we could to trick, what was going to trick the folks that were in southern Iraq, so that they were thinking we were doing a training mission, when in fact we're carrying bombs and we jump across the border, drop our weapons on them, and they come back home, get out of there, those type of things. So Afghanistan was a little bit slow, obviously, before Anaconda, because, you didn't really have an air threat, didn't have a surface air threat. You're just there supporting anybody that's on the ground, essentially the special ops guys, right? Yeah. Doing what they were doing. But
and it's freaking winter there.
Yeah.
Not even Alexander the Great even wrote in his journal, nobody fights here in the wintertime. Crazy amounts of snow and blizzard and everything too. So
the hardest part, believe it or not, for those missions when nothing was happening, well, any of the missions, to be honest with you, we had to hit that tanker out of the UAE at a specific time. If we couldn't get there, we were done. We couldn't, we had to come home. KC-135 would take us all the way up into the AOR, just our 2 ship, drop us off to a KC-10. He'd refuel us the whole time and bring us all the way home. He'd drop us off over the UAE and he'd go home and we'd come back and land at Jabber, talking about maintenance. My contract was about 6,200 hours a year for flying hours. In the 2 years I was a squadron commander between Noble Eagle and Enduring Freedom and Iraqi Freedom, we flew 25,000 hours in 2 years.
Oh my God.
We were only putting on the contract for, our standard contract was 6,000 something. So here we are thinking, wow, we'll never make 6,000 hours a year. And we actually flew almost 25,000, in 2 years. Never aborted the sortie to Afghanistan, never aborted the sortie to southern Iraq for Enduring Freedom and Southern Watch. Never lost a sortie. It goes to show you that you fly those jets off and they don't break.
Well, and that's a great commendation to your maintenance folks, because like you said, you're carrying different weapons into Southern Watch than you're carrying probably down to Afghanistan. And people don't understand the behind the scenes things that you have to do in order to get a jet ready to fly over Southern Watch or to fly down to Afghanistan. Yeah, you're right. The airplanes are flying a lot and they don't seem to break that much. And that was a question I was going to ask you, how the jets were holding up, and you just kind of answered that. But the maintenance and the guys and gals that are loading the bombs and everything are doing it in Kuwait. Still pretty warm, but again, it's such a great commendation to your maintenance folks to be able to keep that going at home and at a deployed location. Incredible story.
So we had some great leadership at Jabber. We had Face Nichols, we had, El Cid, Newslander, we had Ed Jezasek, who was there. Those were the three that were running kind of the operations, day-to-day operations. And man, anything we need, Face Nichols was right there to give it to us. I mean, I could ask for anything and he'd get it for us. And I'm sure Spliff told you, before we went to Afghanistan, they put Fighter Data Link on the jet.
Yes, he did. He mentioned that.
We all got one sortie with Fighter Data Link prior to deploying. We got the academics and everything else. John Sutter, was responsible for getting on the jet, Bud Sutter. He gave us the academics and all. And then we had a long flight to Kuwait to figure it out. So we played with the Fighter Data Link, all the way across the pond to Maran, Spain, and then play with it all the way from Maran to Kuwait. So got a lot of airtime, on the system. So we were really familiar with it. But man, that was just a force multiplier like you would never believe for us, especially going into Afghanistan. We would be out over Pakistan or south of Pakistan. We could see all the way up into Afghanistan, see what aircraft were there, what their load was, what their fuel was, how many bombs they'd dropped, who they were talking to. We could actually, we use cryptic type of text to text back and forth, changing our call signs into words or whatever it may be. So when we got into the AOR, we were ready. Knew who we were going to talk to. We knew the radio frequency. We knew where the targets were because, we had all of their designations on those targets. We knew everything. So when it came time for Anaconda, man, we got there. We were already talking to our JTAC before we ever even were close to the target area. And we said, yeah, we got it. We know where the target area is. We're going to get over top and start dropping bombs, So Fighter Data Link was just a huge force multiplier for us.
And an incredible tool. A lot of airplanes are being networked. The KC-46, the new tankers network like that too. And it's, you're right. It's just a phenomenal capability. You mentioned the name, John Setter. I actually met John when he was flying F4s out of Clark when he was down there. When I went down there for what they call it, Cope Thunder. He was one of the guys, one of the F4 planners down there. Another great American, by the way. Kind of shows you how small the Air Force is. You throw out a name and I know who that is. That's a tanker guy.
I had one mission going. This is the mission I talked to you about that I actually submitted the tanker crew for the air medal on. It was during Anaconda. Matter of fact, I think it was like the first night or something, maybe the second. But I had a two-ship, and I was going in there, and the weather was just terrible. Going up to getting up into Pakistan.
Yeah.
Going in for our last air refueling, had a hydraulic leak. The boomer did, and the hydraulic fluid covered his glass essentially, right?
Yeah.
He couldn't see anything. And he said, "Hey, I can't give you fuel." And I said, "Well, if you don't give us fuel, we have to abort. We have to turn around." And I said, "To be honest with you, that's not an option. Things were bad already during Anaconda just kicked off." I said, "Well, I'm willing to do something if you are." He said, "Well, what do you want to do?" So I said, "Well, I can see the apple. I can see the boom. I can see my refueling probe or my refueling door.
Yeah.
Right? I am going to put the flashlight on the refueling door. It's hopefully you can see it." Yeah. I said, "What I want you to do is I want you to extend the boom about 1 foot, from perfect position, eye contact. And I will talk, we'll talk our jet onto the boom, right?"
Yeah.
So he put that boom out there 1 foot short of contact position. And it took a little bit, but we flew the jet to it until it actually went into the receptacle and it locked, and he gave us fuel. Nothing he had to do, probably 100% against, procedure to do that. And then for my number 2, but, we actually got into the AOR, and glad we did, because we went Winchester on that sortie. That was right when it had started doing close air support. We dropped all of our weapons and shot every bullet we had. If he hadn't have done that, if he just said, "Nope, can't do it," that would have been a 2-ship that couldn't get in there. We were staggered quite a bit. So it would have been probably 2-3 hours without any close air support there. I mean, those guys went above and beyond to do that, to give us gas.
I wish I had seen that write-up. I was the chief of the air fueling control team for Anaconda, and I would have made sure that would have gone somewhere if I did. But you know what, Spanky? I never saw that write-up.
Really?
I never saw it.
Yeah.
Because otherwise I would have made sure somebody got what they deserved. Because there was all kinds of heroics going on. Because as you mentioned, things were going so poorly and got worse. Obviously,
the start of Anaconda. So I know this has been talked about a million times, but there really was no coordination with the air component. I think it was Grace Kelly that sent me a bootleg copy of the brief and said, "Hey, this is about to go down. Kind of need to be ready, right?" Because we're still flying to Afghanistan, whether it's Anaconda or not. Mm-hmm. Then the weather came in, right, and delayed it. So that gave us an opportunity to prepare better for Anaconda. Yeah. We were carrying about a half load typically into Afghanistan. I said, "Hey, we need a full load of bombs on the jet, full load of bombs, full gun, as many as we can get on the jet." They were all LGBs at the time. I said, because I have a feeling this is going to be close air support to the max, because there's nothing else, right? I mean, There's no surface threats, there's no threats, none of that. So it's going to be close air support. The other decision I made was I had a lot of guys in the squadron who never done close air support. So I said, need to think about who we're going to put in lead positions, right, to go out there. And so I made the decision, wasn't popular with everybody, but it's my decision. So I made it, was that I was going to have my flight leads that I knew, that I had known in Lakenheath Heath that had done close air support, and those that came out of the A-10, like Junior Short. Decided to go with them as our flight leads, and then put the other flight leads on the wing. Those other 2 and 4 ship flight leads only needed 2 ship flight leads, another 2 ship flight lead on the wing, so that they could get close air support experience. So when they had to go back, because I couldn't keep sending the same guys back, right? Yeah. So that was my decision I made. In the end, I definitely don't regret that decision. When you look at Roberts Ridge and you look at Battle of
absolutely.
You look at all the emergency close air support that was being called for. And oh, by the way, I had wingmen that were flight leads that were not close air support. Some of those sorties out there, you had to kind of reel them in a little bit from the lead position, Yeah. But so I made the decision, put all the bombs on the jet that you possibly get on them, that my CAS experienced flight leads would lead the first flights into there with the other guys on the wing, the other flight leads on the wing. And of course, when we got in there, it seemed like the minute they got on the ground, it was emergency close air support. Yeah. Chasing guys on the hills, strafing them, on the hills. First time I've ever had an SA-7 shot down at me instead of up at me. On the ridge line, but the ridges being above you. dropping bombs on, Al Qaeda, Taliban that are hiding behind walls and buildings and stuff. And, the most disheartening part of the whole thing is just arriving on station, contacting your JTAC, and they're running. You can hear rounds going off. You hear them running. They're yelling for close air support. So there was nothing, calm about it at all. A lot of heroes on the ground at the beginning of it. Of course, a whole bunch of heroes on Roberts Ridge, including my 4 guys that got the Silver Star. Twist flight, raising those guys that were up there, Air Force Crosses, Medal of Honors. I mean,
they deserve it.
Yeah, it was just, a bad situation. I will say though that if we hadn't coordinated the air support to be there, it would have been a lot worse. The thing that struck me the most, Sluggo, was when I got in there and all this emergency close air support was happening and all the everything was just going crazy. There really was no command and control of the asset in the area. I mean, I don't know how many times I almost had a midair with a Predator at the time, right?
Yeah.
And, then they're calling for a B-52 run. And these guys are yelling for emergency close air support, and they want us to clear out so they can do this 150, 200-mile B-52 bomb run. Great. I mean, it's great to put that many bombs on, but you can't put them that close to somebody that's asking for emergency close air support. Yep. Nor can I wait for them to do a 200-mile bomb run, right? I did move away from the area with my 2-ship, and then the B-52 started its run, and they had an error thinking their coordinates or something. So they had to turn around and go back out. And I said, okay, that's it, I'm done. I told them, I said, hey, keep the B-52 out, move the Predator. We're taking control here, and we're going to, run close air support for my aircraft. And they did, which was good, right? But it seemed like everybody was trying to run that whole scenario, that whole event from another location. I don't even know where the calls were coming from, to be honest with you. We didn't have AWACS. I didn't know where the calls were coming from. They're probably coming from KAOC or the Pentagon or somewhere. I don't know. They don't have eyes on the ground. They had Predator, but they don't see these guys hunkered down in old artesian wells, fighting off Al Qaeda and Taliban. They don't see Taliban and Al Qaeda coming out of the caves. They don't see them running down the slopes, the hillsides. that's the guys that are on scene, right?
Yeah,
they're actually
absolutely.
And so you go back to the whole idea of unmanned aircraft and things like that. You have to have eyes on what's going on, especially in that situation.
Particularly in that situation, Spanky. Yeah. And particularly in the situation that was at Roberts Ridge, all right? Because like you said, there are so many heroes that were fighting on top of that mountain. Britt Slavinsky and his guys on the ground, Chapman, the 2 Medal of Honor winners, Gabe Brown, Kevin Vance, the Army ETAC. All of those guys are hunkered down. I mean, just amazing, amazing stuff. And Nate Self, the guy who was the Ranger leading the QRF, is an absolute badass. And pulling all that off that he had to pull off with his folks there, and did just an incredible job. Again, here, I remember Spliff saying, we showed up, had no idea who Mako 30 was. We're trying to get our heads around that. Boy, talk about the right place at the right time, having Junior Short in Twister 5-1.
Yeah, so I was out there right before them, and we were swapping, and I knew there was something going on that hill, obviously, but I was out of weapons and I was coming home. They were coming in. And so when I landed, they landed right after me, about 4 or 5 hours after me, and that's when, we got together on what had happened. But nobody knew. Nobody knew that helicopter was there, right?
Yeah.
Right guys at the right time, doing something we're never really trained to do, being that flexible, being that capable to go in there and do what they did from a strafe perspective. I know you've done numerous interviews on that, but the strafing that close, the dropping GBU-12s that close, I mean, just an incredible story. But I'll be honest with you, there were a lot of incredible stories during Operation Anaconda.
Yeah, there was.
I think we had 8 DFCs and 4 Silver Stars. When you say emergency close air support, you better make sure that you got the right target.
Yep.
You can't distinguish.
Absolutely.
You can't distinguish bodies on the ground, right? So when they're all running in different directions and you got to figure out who you're dropping on, those first few days of Anaconda, that's what it was, emergency close air support.
Yeah.
And then, strafing. Cliff said the guns canted up 2 degrees for air to air. Luckily, we're strafing down a ridge, right?
Yeah.
But when you strafe down a ridge and there's a ridge in front of you, you got to get over the ridge, right? So,
that's right.
We had to go low rate sometimes because the guns were jamming, and we started strafing low rate. But seeing guys in the woods, in the tree lines and stuff, and going in and strafe them. It's Strike Eagle never strafed in combat, and I didn't know if I was going to get fired or not, for strafing. But the fact of the matter is, when you're out of bombs, you got to strafe. You're not going to put your buddies on the ground. So I knew that wasn't going to be an issue, right?
Absolutely.
The nose art on the jet would probably be worse of an issue than strafing, but when I got home. But no.
Yeah,
So,
one even had your wife on it, didn't it?
Oh, that was for Iraqi Freedom. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, but again, maintenance guys doing what they've never been asked to do, flight crews doing something you never asked them to do, and just do it in such a way that they get decorated for heroism. No issue happened. So it was interesting because I decided to change the loadout right after the first few days because we didn't have any forward air controllers. We didn't have anybody marking targets, those type of things for us. All we're getting is talk-ons to these caves, right? And, you've seen the caves. They're not Carlsbad caverns, you know what I mean?
No,
these little
not
holes
even close.
Yeah, they're little holes where they go in, they roll a rock in front of it, and then you can't see it, right? So they see them on the ground. They see these caves, but there's no way to mark them. So I didn't want to waste any LGBs. And, oh, by the way, by loading Mark 82 dumb bombs on the jet as well, in addition to the GBU-12s, I was able to load more bombs on the jet. The Strike Eagle is a very accurate bombing platform anyways. We get a talk on these caves, and we would drop a dumb bomb, where we thought it was, as close as we could. Sometimes it would hit the target. Sometimes they would give us a talk on from where our bomb hit. Once they gave us a talk on from where that Mark 82 hit, then we'd go in and drop an LGB on the exact location. So I wasn't wasting LGBs, and I also got to carry a lot more bombs by loading Mark 82s on the jet. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I dropped a lot of Mark 82s on pinpoint positions using Fighter Data Link as a designation, passing those to my wingman, him just dropping off my designations, and they looked like they were laser guided bombs. So it gave us an opportunity to have more weapons on the jet and to also, be more accurate with our GBU-12s without wasting them.
You mentioned earlier that you were using thermobaric bombs. Talk about those for just a moment, because if I remember right, Anaconda was the first time we used anything like that. This is like a brand new kind of weapon. Yeah,
this is the first and only time off the Strike Eagle, a thermobaric was dropped later, I think. Well, I mean, that was the big one, right? That they dropped in Afghanistan at the back of the C-130 or C-17, whatever. But so the 422, I think, did all the tests on that, on the thermobaric, and determined that it had to be a Blue 109 hard body, because if you tried to skip it into the cave with just a regular bomb body, it would break apart before it got in there. So they sent it to Kuwait, and we lettered it up, picked my most qualified crews. But one thing I wanted, I went back to the KAOC, and I said, I want to put a data link package on it, right? I don't want to drop it as a GBU-24. In other words, the bomb's flying itself versus me flying the bomb, right? Yeah. I asked to put a data link package on it, guidance package, and they denied it. And I said, well, you understand the route of flight that you've given us and the parameters you've given us to drop this. We have about a 20% chance of success on it, right? Because there's a ridgeline right in front of it. And I said, we'd like to use the the data link package, GB15, to fly it over the ridge and then fly it short of the tunnels and it's supposed to skip in, right? But they denied it. No kidding. I mean, I think our delivery was off by about a half a degree, one to 1.5 degrees, or a half degree to 1 degree. Yeah. And it actually clipped the very tip of that ridge, just landed short, essentially. But to be honest with you, didn't matter, right? Because right after they dropped that bomb, we didn't even get the second bomb off the jet. They actually got called in for emergency close air support. So they went right from dropping that thermobaric. Matter of fact, I think they were getting emergency close air support requests before the bomb even hit. They just called off the second bomb and then went into the valley and started dropping bombs on emergency close air support. But it's another one of those, hey, trust your air crew, and your weapons officers and stuff to tell you what, how the best way to deliver this. I think maybe the reason why was because of Never Seek Eagle. Maybe that's why, they wouldn't allow that GB15 package on it. It's more important that they got in there to do close air support.
I know, having been at the KAOC during this time period, they basically throw that thing down the throat of the cave and go down, skip back to the back, go off. It went from 14 PSI to 3,200 PSI inside the cave and wiped the thing out. An amazing weapon.
Yeah. I'm not even sure it was in the cave, to be honest with you. I mean, it's a very large cave. I'm sure there might have been something in there. I don't know. But, it's designed to the whole tunnel system. Take care of anything that's in the tunnel system. And that was Sudbud Sutter and Tex Co. that did that. They went in and I think they were actually the first ones to strafe, maybe. Yeah, they went in there and did some good work as well, leaving after dropping the thermobaric. But
when I got to AFSOC, I actually found that test report. The program was called Divine Kingfisher because I had all this paperwork on my desk when I first showed up. I'm like, oh, what the heck is this? And it was that thermobaric test that the 422 and everybody had been doing, trying to figure out how to do that. As you know, all weapons have this divine name in front of another name. Yeah. And, I thought, what is this? Divine Kingfisher. And I read that with some real fascination, knowing what had happened in Afghanistan, that particular test program.
That was the first day, obviously, of Anaconda. I think where they landed in the Shorty-Cove Valley. Part of the whole planning that we did get to plan for Anaconda initially, and getting the thermobarics on the two jets, and then getting the full load of, in case of emergency, close air support. But it was a mess. I mean, it was a mess when we got there,
Yeah. So how long are you guys at home before you end up going to Iraqi Freedom?
Okay, so we got home, I'm going to say about the April, May timeframe, maybe something like that, maybe even June, I can't remember. We left pretty much right after Anaconda. The Marine Corps came in to replace us with their F-18s, Super Hornets. We went home, got home. We're still flying Noble Eagle, right? So our guys didn't get much time at home, started flying Noble Eagle, and then we had to lead the NSI, Nuclear Surety Inspection, for the wing. Never, understood why we had to do that, but we did. So, we just got all our guys back, went right into an NSI, did the NSI, and then planning started, Iraqi Freedom. It was interesting, when I was on the ramp, I met the Secretary of the Air Force, Roach, I think it was at the time, at Jabber. And he said, hey, Spanky, he said, we were talking, give him a tour. He said, Spanky, if you were, say, to go to war again, like in the next 6 months or something, he goes, what would you want on your jet? And I said, I want a new targeting pod. I need a next gen targeting pod on my jet. And he said, son, you're living in the past. And I said, well, what do you suggest? And he said, JDAM. And I said, well, yeah, if I can get JDAM on the jet and everything required to drop it, I'd be happy to put JDAM on the jet. But you said in the next 6 months, and I don't think JDAM is going to be available in 6 months, for us to be able to drop. He said, yeah, you're probably right. So, I said, if you're asking me long run, definitely JDAM would be a good weapon to have on the jet. So anyways, I had an inkling something might be going on, right? As you know, there was a lot of planning going on, Task Force 20. That was being run out of, I think, Checkmate at the time with Mountain Home. We were getting words of that too. So we knew for Iraqi Freedom, you're going to deploy more than one squadron, right, of strike. Yeah. I personally thought it was probably going to be Lakenheath that would deploy for Iraqi Freedom, flying out of, taking the 493rd and 494th. But word came down eventually that it was going to be Seymour that was going to deploy again. So the 336 was the first squadron that was going to deploy. And they didn't think my squadron was going to deploy at all. Actually said that if you did deploy, then you probably will give up command and let somebody deploy. You'll be the acting OG at Seymour. And I said, well, I'd really like to go with my squadron. I've only been a squadron commander for a year. Things were starting to happen in Mountain Home, right? They were telling Mountain Home, hey, you're not going to go because you have either an RI or an NSI. I can't remember. I think it was an RI that they had to do. So they're telling Bold Tigers, you're not going. That mission actually transferred to me, and specifically the 335th. And at the time, nobody knew about it. So my wing leadership didn't know about it. I knew about it. Cholo Darcy with the Bold Tigers was leading that for the Bold Tigers, and he knew everything about it. Jack Ruby was at the Pentagon. He knew everything about it. He'd done all the planning. They had done all the exercises with all the players out at Nellis. So I knew I was going to deploy. I just didn't know when I was going to deploy. Wing leadership had no idea I was going to deploy. I finally did get word, and we deployed in January 2003. Showed up on the base, and the first question was, "What are you doing here?" So I said, "I can't tell you, but I'm sure somebody will." And
this General Rosberg.
Yeah, good guy. I mean, good friend. But when somebody shows up at your base where you deploy wing command, you got all those assets on base. and one of your squadron shows up that you had no idea was even going to, you obviously have questions, right? And so I got a call one day and Kent, and he said, "Hey, Spanky, I'm not going to tell you what he said to me, but the bottom line, there was an Army general that wanted to talk to his air crew, and I was his air crew, right?" I went there and he said, "You need to tell me what's going on." I said, "I can't." And I said, "I'm sure the general will." So he tells him, what's going on, goes through all the briefing, goes through all the objectives, the different objectives and all. We get done, and he said, "Man, I'm leaving a lot out because I don't want to talk about it." But, he said, "Okay." He said, "Is there anything else I need to know?" And I said, "Yeah, you got 6 Tomcats showing up tomorrow off the Connie." And he said, "There is no way that Chief of Naval Operations is going to let 6 Tomcats deployed to IUD and be in the command of an Air Force." So I get a call next morning and they say, "Spanky, your Tomcats are in the pattern." I said, "Okay." So I went out to the flight line, I met him. I'd already talked to Flats Flatley. Flats Flatley was the squadron commander. He's the skipper of the Tomcats. They were Tomcat A's, F-14 A's. And they were our FAC A's, right, for Task Force 20.
Yeah.
And
VF 154, the Black Aces, the Black Aces, the Black Knights.
So they showed up. They didn't have any Brick 112 radios. They didn't have anything, right? So I gave them radios and taught them how to use the radios in case they went down, which was a good thing because we did lose.
Black Knight 104. I
asked Flats, I said, "Hey, do you want to fly off to Con, or you want to come to IUD?" And he said, "Well, you guys got beer and whiskey, so we're coming to IUD." So I said, "Okay." We gave 6 beats, and they stayed on the boat, the ship, the carrier. And then I had A-10s out of, but they couldn't fly the long legs out of IUD, so we kept them up there in Kuwait. And then I had 12 F-16 CJs. It was a mix of the Swamp Fox and Spangdahlem, South Carolina Guard and Spangdahlem guys. So I had a lot of assets, and I had my 12 Strike Eagles. These assets were specifically assigned to Task Force 20. All my other 12 jets, they flew the daytime missions. All of our nighttime missions were essentially Task Force 20 missions. So my ops officer at that time was Mark Mao. Mark Mao, chairman, ran the daytime operations. I ran the nighttime operations because, again, 24-hour ops, you can't be there all day. We had certain objectives that we had to fly. The objective, it wasn't a one-night mission, right? And so these objectives took, 3, 4 nights, 5 nights to execute. So, almost every one of my missions was a Task Force 20 mission. Actually, the first mission that I flew for Task Force 20 was the night before Iraqi Freedom actually kicked off. It was out in the West. We had a F-14.
What went on out there? I remember that. That, Spanky. There's all these airplanes out by H3, and they're having a party out there dropping stuff because I can hear it on AC1 in the KOC. And I'm like going, what the heck's going on out there?
So we had a full package, strike package, or we call it a Task Force 20 package, fighter assets, and they had their entire package, and we went out there and did what they were supposed to do. And as I'm coming home, we lost Tomcat lost an engine. He went into another base, and then they got an engine out to him and got it fixed up, brought it back. But as I'm coming back from that mission, it was a night mission. Coming back, it's daytime now. And as I'm flying back over Kuwait to go south, I see them knocking down the berms, they're in Kuwait to start the operation that next day. And then I flew the first night of Iraqi Freedom, but we didn't fly a Task Force 20 mission. I actually flew, I led the first package across, but I was flying OCA that night. So I was flying an air-to-air mission. We had an 8-ship of OCA, and then the rest were going out, the mix of AGM-130s, GBU 10s, 12s, you name it.
Oh, yeah. The picture of your ramp is incredible with all the different loads that you guys were carrying that night.
Yeah, I was really excited about that first mission because Strike Eagle's never flown an OCA mission in combat. So, but as you know, from a tanker perspective, we didn't have enough gas for so they were back, at the border, Saudi Arabia. My mission was going up to Baghdad before it started, setting up a cap there and, having the B-2s, 117s come across. My job was to essentially protect them from any air assets or any air threat that came up. But quickly learned that the only person they could see was me and my 4-ship. And first big war I've ever worn night vision goggles, right? So it's interesting because, the small caliber stuff you don't care about. You can see they go up and they come down.
Yeah.
The larger stuff, the S-60 stuff, that's always a concern. But you see that thing shoot up and it's like, poof, and you just see it going up and up and up. It's like taking forever. You go, well, if I just turn that way and drive that way, time is just perfect. It might be able to hit me, Obviously, the big AAA wasn't a concern because I could see it all, but it was the amount of SAMs that were coming up that night that obviously had me.
Gosh.
Because, like I said, I'm up there first and I'm the only one that can see, especially when the B-2s and the 117s start dropping their bombs. Then they just start going crazy. Never saw a 117, never saw a B-2, even though I knew exactly where they were going, where they were, timing there, but I never saw them. So finally decided to take the 4-ship and go towards the Iranian border because there was just way too much, after the B-2s and 117s left, just way too much of a threat there with all the SAMs that were coming up.
Yeah.
And again, with night vision goggles, you see which ones are guiding, which ones aren't guiding. Move the 4-ship over towards the border. So kind of non-eventful. Matter of fact, before we stepped, we got reports that they were burying their aircraft. And when I got out there, I started looking at the runway to see if anything was getting ready to take off or taking off. And there's nothing but barriers on the runway, all kinds of barriers. So I knew it was going to take off anywhere. Not much excitement that night from an OC-8 perspective, but definitely a lot of excitement from a surface-to-air threat type of. But and then after that night, then I just did straight Task Force 20 missions.
Why didn't you explain to my audience who Task Force 20 was? Pete Blaber, who was a Delta Force commander, actually has a chapter on his Wolverines, but just explain to everybody real quick who those people are, because you are right.
So they're all the special operations guys
out there. All those guys.
I mean, it's Delta, it's SEALs. I mean, it's it was just Special Operations Command, right?
Yeah.
They had certain objectives that they were going to take. I won't say the number and where they were. There had to be a lot of coordination prior to them going in, because obviously they're going extremely slow, right? They have C-130s, they got little birds, they got, Chinooks. They go in slow, and they're going a long ways. All my missions were pretty much west and north of Baghdad. There's a lot of prep that has to go in to do things prior to them going in to do things, right? Mm-hmm. We called it Task Force Tiger. Different squadrons involved. It's just Task Force Tiger. It's what they called the squadron. So I actually had 2 squadrons at one time, Task Force Tiger, 335th. We would go in with our full package, do what we need to do before the objectives were ever executed.
Yeah.
Then we'd go in, obviously, while they were executing their mission, and then we would escort them out. And, that would take a long time. But I had the full complementary fighter assets, Strike Eagles, F-16s, A-10s, EA-6Bs, F-14 Tomcats, which are FAC-As. But, those missions lasted like 9 or 10 hours.
Oh, I know. They were really, really long sorties, because I remember seeing the air refueling requirements for the TF-20 stuff. And it's like, holy smokes, they're getting a lot of gas.
We weren't the most popular guys at IUD, that's for sure, or at Kuwait, because whatever we wanted, we got. We always got our tankers. We always got any weapons that we wanted. I could ask for a GB-24, which we weren't dropping GB-24s, but I dropped 2 GB-24s, took out 2 bridges with those. The only bridges I think that were dropped during all of our Iraqi Freedom. I even had tankers, as you're doing the execution in the target area. Yeah. You can't leave. You can't go down to Kuwait or the border. I had to call the tankers forward, and those tankers would come forward all the way up towards Baghdad, come up there and meet us and give us gas. And then we started to run out of bombs. We started to run out of LGBs. My guys in the daytime were dropping dumb bombs, and we were getting all the LGBs to drop. But it wasn't unusual for me to go out on a Task Force 20 mission and take out. Here's a typical mission. I went out. And I think my 2-ship, I can't remember the numbers, but we dropped all of our weapons, but we took out all tanks, all long-range artilleries, all Republican Guard barracks, and a bridge. So, so that's with just my 2-ship. And then I had, for Task Force 20, I had more too. Sometimes I had 6 ship out there, Strike Eagles.
Yeah.
And those guys are taking out gunboats. They're taking out, the same things I'm taking out, surface-to-air sites. The whole idea was anything that could threaten the package, I had to deal with. And it even meant putting ourselves out there in order to draw that attention. We would get down low. The Tomcats would get down low to bring up any type of AAA or any type of surface-to-air threats, and then we'd deal with them as they would come up. I mean, I had one mission where I went out and so the Tomcats are relaying the targets to us, right? They're getting the information somewhere, and I don't even know where. But as we're going in on the execution day, I got a call, hey, you got to take out these 4 long-range mortars. So went in, found the long-range mortars, through our targeting pod. Took out 2 myself, then my wingman took out 2. We had a GBU-24 on board to take out a Republican Guard barracks. So I'm heading over to Republican Guard barracks. At that time, they go, no, we need for you to take out a bridge, going to the objective. So I said, okay, because there were Republican Guard that were starting to come across the bridge, right?
Yeah.
So they had already come across the bridge, but I have a hard body GBU-24, a blue 109 body, which is not best for taking out bridges, right? Because it typically makes a hole. So I dropped the GBU-24, and I lined myself up so that when it went through the bridge, it would hit the abutment and hopefully drop it. And it did. Went through the bridge, put a hole in it, hit the abutment, blew it up, dropped 300 feet of the leading edge of the bridge. My wingman comes in. He doesn't have the same luxury that I do, so he drops his GBU-24, but it takes out the bridge, but it just leaves just a massive hole and it doesn't blow it up, right? But now this bus is stopped right on the bridge, or not a bus, the armored personnel carrier is stuck on the bridge, and we had the A-10s come in and deal with them. From there, I went back to the Republican Guard barracks and took out a Republican Guard barracks with a GBU-12, and so did my wingman. And then we came back and had some 23 millimeter that was popping up, and they were smart. They would shoot when they saw something, and they would stop shooting. It was dark. This is where the pod story comes in. So we had sniper pods on the jet. We got them on after we got the IED, so we got some training on them. But the sniper pod has a laser pointer on it, essentially, laser marker.
Yeah.
And we were vision goggles. So the only way we could pull up this 23 millimeter was to get down low enough for him to shoot at us, preferably. I have my laser marker that's firing out that side of the jet. I have a general idea where it is, and I have my night vision goggles on. So I see where the 23 millimeters firing. I put my laser marker on, and it starts marking the position. So I'm holding it here, and I designate it, and it's just holding right there on that position for that 23 millimeter. Then I call up the A-10. I said, hey, do you have your night vision goggles on? They said, yeah. And I said, do you see my laser marker? And they said, yeah. I said, well, that's where the 23 millimeter is. So they came and strafed it, and that took that out. So that was a typical mission, right? And we had gunboats that were taken out that night with some other LGBs. And then we left from there. And then I got called on another former objective, which was by the Haditha Dam. Got called over there to support that team that was already in place there. That was about a 10-hour mission, I think. But so that was a typical day, the execution type of thing. So you can have, anywhere from 120 special ops guys going into one area, and they got all their assets. And we're just responsible for different areas within that objective area. We're not all, right over top of it type of thing. We're trying to take care of any threats that are out there. And that was a typical mission.
But see, this task force had its own Air Force. That was one of the unusual things about this war, was this Special Operations Task Force, TF-20, had their own Air Force inside the Air Force, which had never been done before. And I had known they had practiced a lot of their tactics in the Nellis range and worked a lot of things out. Were you flying that one day that they had the special ops guys ran into some real trouble at Haditha Dam? Yeah,
so that's when I got called off of escorting Task Force 20 home. That's where I got called to, was Haditha Dam. That's where they had the lady, I think, that was yelling for help. They went there and blew up a vehicle or whatever it was.
Yeah.
When they went in, initially, they really didn't have, there was an SA-8. I think we had to deal with some stuff like that. And they were dealing with, obviously, a lot of stuff on the ground. But then after they had been there for a couple of days and we were on another objective, we had to go back and support them because they were really taking a lot of heavy fire at that point. So we went back and dropped whatever remaining weapons we had in close air support for them for that. So it's kind of 2 Task Force 20 missions that night. Yeah, so it's interesting. So, nobody ever wants, special ops guys never want conventional guys around them, it seems like, right?
Yes.
But after that, it became, okay, we always want conventional fighters with us in these type of missions, because I would say that a lot of them wouldn't have been executed as smoothly as they were. One of those, I think, was actually the Jessica Lynch. That was very smooth. That was just a pop-up mission that we had. But, so after it was all said and done, when I came back to the States and we were doing the debriefs and all, they actually wanted to have my unit assigned to them as their fighter support for any operations that they do. And the Air Force is like, nah, we ain't doing that. Any of our squadrons can do what they did. You just have to coordinate with them, but we're not going to have a fighter squadron that's specifically assigned to special operations.
But that's a great gouge for the chiefs, though, man. You have to really, really earn their trust. That's great words for your squadron, that they go, okay, well, we're not going anywhere without the chiefs. That's good words, man, for your squadron.
So it's funny because you say that about, they don't want to know they don't want you to know who they are, right? So we were going through briefings every night, and we would do it at the SOCOM KAOC, essentially, right? Special Ops KAOC.
Yeah.
Yeah, there. And they're all on, video conference, teleconference, wherever they're at. They're all covered up. They're all blacked out and everything else, and goods on them. And we're sitting there around this table. We're all in our flight suits, just looking at them. I go, "Come on, guys. One, if I saw you, I wouldn't remember you tomorrow." And I said, "Two, we've been doing at the very end. So we've been doing these missions together forever. Yeah. You guys are still not gonna. You're still gonna sit there and cover it up." And they did. They didn't take their stuff off. Yeah, but they don't want you to know who they are, and I totally get that. I totally understand it. Yeah. And now, by the way, that was the first real time, other than the 12 that were in Afghanistan, that was the first real time that we saw that type of special operations execution. And I'm telling you, they're badass. I mean, they really are.
Absolutely.
And I was just happy to be able to support them from a fighter perspective, because if they would have had to call in close air support, I think it would have been a chocolate mess. They would just had your standard guys out there calling in for close air support. I mean, everything we did had to be coordinated down to the T. And by the way, if they didn't hear my voice or Trello Darcy's voice, it was a no-go. They only had essentially 2 people, I think it was 4 people that they would actually let the fighter or the fighter package.
Yeah.
If those forces weren't there or aborted, then it was done. It wasn't going to get executed. It was definitely interesting. But
I had a gentleman, a special forces gentleman. I'm not going to go into who he was or where he was. Or I had a special forces gentleman that came to my desk, and he said, "Sluggo, I need your help." And I said, "What do you need?" He says, "I'm a Task Force 20 guy," which I knew. And he said, "I need an air refueling area right here for the next week and a half, 2 weeks." Yeah. And I said, "Okay, I know you can't tell me what's going on out there. Do you need it high? Do you need it low? What do you need?" And he goes, "Fast movers." I said, "Okay, perfect." It was out by the Syrian border, out by the dam and a bunch of other things along that highway that leads out to Damascus. I don't know if you remember this. I named all of the Iraqi tracks in Iraqi airspace after female country western singers.
Yeah.
General Mosley came up to me on the 4th night, Spanky, and said, actually the 3rd night, says, "Sluggo, we're having to go too far for gas. We got to move tankers into Iraq. You guys have to take some of the risk and everything." I put Sinai and Reba directly below Baghdad.
Yeah, Reba always sticks in my mind, but we didn't have enough gas. I mean, the first night getting on the tanker was a chocolate mess. I mean, everybody needed gas except for the Strike Eagles. So I get up on the tanker, and they were sending guys to booms that had drugs and vice versa. I had a Viper guy come up and 117 guys said, "Hey, we need gas now. We're less than emergency fuel." And so we got off the tanker, let them get on, and they got their gas. But man, there was a lot of puckering going on that first night. People trying to get on tankers to get gas. There just wasn't enough of them. I had to drive a lot of them forward. And seeing the different rockets going off from the Army, I mean, you see those things going off, and everybody looks at them the first time and go, first time combat, and go, SAM launch. It's not a SAM launch.
I remember getting that report back from the crew that said, "We're being fired at by SAMs from the south." And I went, "Wait a minute, from the south? It should be from the north." And that's when we found out that MLRS rocket systems were firing through Reba and Shania.
They were, yeah. So I was on that flight when I was on the boom when that tanker made the call. He was going to retrograde. And I said, "No, it's not SAM.
Something else.
MLRS is coming."
Yeah.
Yeah. But I had on night vision goggles too, so I could see him coming from the ground. We lost a Tomcat, as you know. They got picked up, and then I lost one Strike Eagle one night. They didn't make it.
Was Boots on a TF-20 mission?
No, they were on a regular mission. It was Salty and Boot, and they were actually from the 333rd. They deployed with my squadron. So, when we deployed, we need 48 crews because we had 24 jets doing 24-hour operations. So, we had to have 48 crews. So luckily, I mean, I already had 12. We call them the Mountain Home 12 that came with us for Task Force 20. Then I was augmented by the 333rd for the rest of the crews. And Boot and Salty were 2 of those crews. And Salty was a chief before, and I would have taken him anywhere. Don't know what happened. It's all types of speculation. Mosley just said it doesn't matter. It's a combat loss. We don't do safety investigations in combat.
Yeah.
So wasn't the best night. We initially thought they had gotten out, but then found out later they did. And that's another long story. But yeah, there were 2 completely capable aircrew that, in that jet, both instructors.
We had a tanker that went all the way up there near Tikrit to help refuel the ResCat.
Yeah, every time we got done with the mission, we go up there and do a ResCat. save some gas to get up there.
Yeah.
And then the special ops guys actually went in to recover anything they could. And they recovered remains from Salty, but not Boot initially. Then they went in and found some remains for Boot. That's when they were finally declared KIA instead of MIA. Two great Americans, gave their life for their country, like a lot of folks did in Afghanistan and Iraq. Yeah, so it was.
Hey, there's one thing I want to ask you about. And I know this is a tradition in the Chiefs because I met one of your Chiefs, Bubba's, up there. Everyone in the Chiefs, including the wife, is given like a chief call sign. His was Chief Dimple.
Oh, yeah. The Chief. Like yeah. So I'm Chief Munchin here.
Tell the listeners about this because this is really funny. Actually, he's told us his wife's call sign was Chief Screeching Squaw, I think was her name. Yeah. So they have princess names. And I said, what are you talking about? He says, hey, the Chiefs, go ahead and tell the listeners about this because this is really a funny story. Yeah,
so mine's Chief Munchin here. And matter of fact, General Myers at the time was Chief Smoking Gun. He came to Iraq to meet us, and he introduced himself as Chief Smoking Gun. And so I'm Chief Munchin here, and my wife is Princess Shriveled Totem, I think. Oh, Princess Spank My Hide is her. Princess Spank My Hide, and I'm Chief Munchin here. So that tradition goes way, way back. I mean, that's
way back.
Yeah, that's like Korea or something, for the chief names. I mean, just the lineage and the history of the Eagle squadrons. The Chiefs being one of them is just incredible, right? Being the Eagle Squadron, the volunteers that went over there during the Battle of Britain, being that Fighter Squadron, of course, the Chiefs being the world's leading MiG killers, 218.5, MiG kills, all in Korea. And then we have the only Strike Eagle kill, which is a helicopter kill, right? But the GBU 10, I think it was.
Another great story. Yeah, GBU 10 on a hovering helicopter during Desert Storm.
Well, it wasn't airborne when he dropped it, but it got airborne and it didn't go very far. Pretty much got paper up. But,
I heard that in the video, you can see the bomb actually go through the cockpit windshield. Somebody told me.
Yeah. I think it went through the rotor, went through the cockpit and vaporized it pretty much. There wasn't anything left of it. And, of course, my flagship was 487, which is they call it America's jet. I think it's got like 10,000 plus hours on it now. I don't know. It's got a bunch. But, that's the one with the kill on it. And it's always a cheap flagship.
Yeah.
Just a beautiful jet. Always a great jet to take on cross country with air shows.
What an incredible career that jet has had too. Flying in Desert Storm, deploying Southern Watch, Northern Watch, all those different places with that great big green star under the cockpit.
Yeah.
So you head off to War College. So what happens while you're there?
I get to War College and did quite a few interviews there with Dr. Rebecca Grant. So I got a call one day, one night at home. It's just a funny story, but I got a call one night at home, and it was one of the aides or somebody to the president, George Bush. And he said, hey, Spanky, can you come to Constitution Hall tomorrow and meet the president and his cabinet? And I said, okay, what about? And they said, well, the Secretary of the Air Force has selected you as the field grade officer who's made the most significant contribution to the global war on terrorism from 2001 to 2003. I said, okay. I said,
oh my gosh.
I said, I'll be there. So called up the Air Force chair, and I called up my mentor, who was Dr. Lonnie Cass, who's just a great American, right? So her call sign was Chick. She's an Israeli intel officer, and she worked for every chief of staff of the Air Force for years. But she was an instructor there, and so I called both of them that night. I said, hey, I won't be in class in the morning because I have to go. The president wants to see me, meet me or whatever. So I said, I don't know what it is. They go, yeah, no problem. So I said, okay. I get a call in the morning before I'm heading over to Constitution Hall, whatever it is, and it is my chair. And he goes, Spanky, I talked to the president, and he doesn't have an appointment with you this morning. I said, you called the president? He said, yeah, the president of National Defense University, the admiral. I said, no, not the NDU president, the president of the United States. He goes, oh, Jesus Christ. He said, what the hell's the president want to see you about? I said, I have no idea. They just asked me if I would go there. So I called you guys. I'm supposed to be at Constitution Hall at like 11 o'clock. He said, yeah, you better get your, whatever over there. So I went over there and so I met President Bush and I met his cabinet. Then he did a speech. And so that was the whole thing. I mean, it wasn't some big, gigantic, and circumstance thing, but it was pretty cool actually to meet the cabinet, Condi Rice, Colin Powell and George Bush and all. I actually gave him my coin. I don't know if he still has it. I don't know if you remember I gave him my coin, but it was my cheap coin I gave that I flew both in Enduring Freedom and Iraqi. Yeah, so it's just a funny story. They thought I was going to go see the president of National Defense University.
No, the other president.
Oh yeah, I mean, they actually had a ride for me to take me over to Constitution Hall and everything, And then when I got done, I walked out and they go, "Oh no, you got to take a taxi back to the school." So he kind of left me out. I had to go find a taxi somewhere, take a taxi back to National War.
We're done with you now.
Yeah, exactly. But that was just a funny little story there. But actually, that was one of 3 times I met him while I was in National War College.
Really? What's the other 2 times?
Yeah, the last time I met him was he gave a joint speech to ICAF and National War College. And I was sitting kind of almost in the front row. And we got down, everybody would shake his hand. He goes, "How many times have I seen you in the last 3 months?" I said, "This is the 3rd time you've seen me." And he said, "I've seen you a lot in the last 3 months." It was a dinner that Brett Bear spoke at, and George. Great stories for National War College.
That's amazing to meet the commander in chief.
Yeah.
And all the things that go on around him too, and all the entourage that he's always got around it too. Oh, yeah. So crazy
Straight up guy.
Is he? Well, yeah, he's a fighter pilot. He flew F-102s for crying out loud.
Yeah, he's a rancher from Texas. I mean, I don't think you can get any more down to earth than that,
No, Colonel James Dennis, Spanky, I cannot thank you enough for spending 2 hours with me here on the Lessons from the Cockpit show. And you and I both know we could go for 2 more hours.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being on the Lessons from the Cockpit show and sharing your experiences and telling us a little bit about what it was like flying the F-4 and the F-15E and Anaconda. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to say being a squadron commander is an easy job when you have the people that I had, both on the ops side and the maintenance side, and, no fooling around. I mean, they were just dedicated to the mission. They knew what they were doing. They were well trained, and they executed flawlessly in both wars. Yeah. Even the same for Bosnia, even out of the 494th when I was Corps commander there. It really is the people, because as a commander, I found out that there's no way you can be there all day, every day. You just have to trust your leadership that you put in place, because if not, you'll die of a heart attack trying to figure it out.
And now you're doing great things with this company down there in Orlando. What's the name of it again?
Yeah, ASRC Federal, Arctic Slope Regional Company, Corporation, ASRC Federal. There's something about, 1, supporting the warfighter, and 2, working for a company that supports the Alaska Native on the northern slope, the Arctic slope region. I mean, it's like a double reward for me, to be able to support that warfighter that's still out there and give him the best capability, he or her the best capability possible, and doing that through, a company like ASRC, which I just love. Great leadership and just by the mere fact that they are supporting the Alaska Native corporate folks on the Nupiats. I mean, for me, it's a double win, because those people deserve to maintain the quality of life they've always had.
Hats off to your company for doing that.
And it's a really capable company. I mean, very low risk for the government. So
thanks for being on with us. Okay.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. And hope I didn't go too long. There's many stories to tell, but the stories are all out there, and there are a lot of heroes out there in the past, whether it be Desert Storm all the way through what we're currently doing today.
This episode ends our look at the Battle of Roberts Ridge during Operation Anaconda in March of 2002. Folks, we did a lot of things wrong, but fortunately we learned our lessons and we did not make these mistakes during the Shock and Awe campaign. We looked back at Operation Anaconda as a great learning experience and said, these are the mistakes we will not make again. And we didn't. I hope you've enjoyed listening to the stories of these 7 people that were involved in Operation Anaconda, me being one of them as the guy running all air refueling. But boy, listening to Al Mack and Greg Calvert going on top of Takragar Mountain was just amazing. In the show notes below, I've put some links to some of the video and some of the documentaries on Operation Anaconda that you can go and listen to later on. I've also put links to Spanky's airplanes, both at Tegu, Moody, his F-15E Strike Eagles that he flew with the different units that you can buy from Wall Pilot, custom aviation art for the walls of your home, office, or hangar. These images are printed on vinyl. They're extremely detailed. You can peel them off and stick them to any flat surface. They come in 4, 6, and 8 feet if you go to the ready to print section of wallpilot.com. We also do custom artwork. A little more expensive, but we can put your name, unit number, tail code, any weapons load on the image for you at wallpilot.com. Please go to my website, marcusera.com, to listen to this and previous episodes of the Lessons from the Cockpit show. On next week's show, we're going to hear from a 97-year-old MiG killer who had his story covered up for 50 years. I look forward to talking to you again next week on the Lessons from the Cockpit show. Have a great weekend, folks.